Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives, and today we're going to be continuing our discussion on the Electroverse storyline as we take a look at Web Warriors number 2. Now, last time on Web Warriors, at the conclusion of Spider-Verse, Billy Braddock, aka Spider UK, decided that he was going to be a protector to any worlds that lost their various Spider people during the Spider-Verse storyline, and to maintain this mission, he wound up assembling a team of other Spideys from across the multiverse, which consisted of himself, Anya Corazon, who at the time was the main universe Spider-Girl, Spider-Man Noir, Spider-Man India, Spider-Gwen, Spider-Ham, and for the purposes of this book, Mayday Parker, the MC2 Spider-Girl, now Spider-Woman. And together they formed the team known as the Web Warriors, who, like I said, would protect any worlds that lost their Spideys when the Inheritors attacked in Spider-Verse, and basically just dealing with any other multiversal threats that came their way. And one of those threats was, well, a multiversal army of Electros, as while Gwen and Mayday were out having lunch in the Egyptian universe, they wound up encountering a team of Electros who were trying to steal silver from the bank. While the pair of them suited up and tried to fight them, sadly the Electros wound up overpowering them, and the pair of Spider-Woman sadly had to retreat, though unfortunately before Gwen could follow Mayday back to Loomworld, she got zapped by the Electros and was captured, brought back to their home base on another world, where they let her know that they had already built an army and that the Spideys weren't the only ones who were crossing the web of life, so to speak. Which is where this issue begins, and well, to put simply, it actually does not start with Gwen or the or the Web Warrior, so to speak. In fact, it actually gives us kind of a backstory as to how the Electro army was formed, or as it's actually called, the Electroverse. It actually is called, the army in universe is called the Electroverse, and I will explain why in a minute. But basically, how the Electroverse got its start was, well, through the Spider-Verse storyline. For those of you who don't remember, back in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, Number 9, one of the Spideys that we saw killed in that issue was a version of Spider-Man from a universe where New York was on the moon. And basically, in the end story, it was more or less just kind of a throwaway Spidey, just there to help further showcase how the Inheritors were jumping across universes and how the Moon Spidey was ultimately just another body to the pile, so to speak. However, this storyline actually showcases that the battle between that world's Spider-Man and Morlun actually wound up having an unintentional viewer. Specifically, that world's version of Max Dillon, aka Electro, who basically just saw this very all-powerful interdimensional vampire just swoop in and kill a guy who was very much a thorn in his side for many years. And when they were fighting, he heard Morlun talking about how he had killed Spider-Man from across thousands of worlds, done this 1,000 times. And sure enough, after Morlun killed that world Spider-Man and then left, well, Max started having ideas, because if what Morlun was saying was true, then that meant that there were probably an infinite amount of worlds out there. And considering that Morlun himself was so powerful that he could actually finally kill Spider-Man, who Max has been unable to kill for years, he began to think maybe if he could go into the multiverse himself, he could find the very thing he needed to essentially just rule the world, so to speak. As such, using his own power, while he himself could not physically jump across the multiverse alone, he could access the frequencies of different radio waves. Basically, just tap into vibrational frequencies, which is how people usually operate with the multiverse. Since the usual theory with it is that it's basically different Earths all inhabiting the same space and time. They just vibrate at different frequencies. And basically, Electro brought that knowledge to his world's Dr. Octopus, and from that knowledge, that world's Doc Ock was able to create a watch that would allow Max to jump into whatever universe he wanted to if he just powered it up and utilized this whole tap into other frequencies thing. Though the instant Max got the watch, he wound up frying that world's Doc Ock. From there, Moon Electro wound up just jumping from universe to universe, just trying to find a place, trying to find a world that would be his next big break, so to speak. And basically, for some worlds, he dealt with the usual multiversal shenanigans, finding worlds that were just weird, running into alternate versions of people he knew, in some cases running into alternate versions of himself, but no matter where he went, he never stopped looking for a world where he could find what he wanted to take over. And sure enough, in his travels, he eventually found one, so to speak, as he found a reality where that world's version of Max Dillon, or Mike Dillon as he's called in that universe, which, side note, I kind of love that his alternate self is actually named Mike instead of Max, because, you know, I like little differences like that. But either way, in that universe, Mike Dillon, when he got his electric powers, rather than going on to become a supervillain, he actually used them to become an entrepreneur, pretty much marketing them into creating a new brand of electronics, like like electric cars and so on and so forth. And it essentially just made him millions to the point where he actually owns it, or he actually owned his own business. It was probably one of the most successful people on his earth. So the instant Moon Electro saw his rich corporate counterpart, he approached him and thought, "Hey, let's share ideas." And sure enough, once Mike saw his Moon counterpart and learned that he had been jumping the multiverse, well, his mind was a buzzing because the instant he learned about, because basically upon learning that about the whole infinite multiverse thing, he wound up taking what Moon Electro talked about with the whole tapping into other frequencies, and he began mapping it out. Not only did he begin mass producing the device that Moon Electro was using to jump between universes, but he actually began looking across. But he actually began creating a digital map of the multiverse, which yes, did look like the Web of Life and Destiny. But basically, he felt that if they could tap into this web, then they could find a way to essentially take it over, pretty much create it, pretty much just absorb it. Think of it like a corporate merger, so to speak, where a big company absorbs a little one. Though Mike Dillon was fully aware that the two of them couldn't do it on their own. They would need help. Which is where Electroverse came in. Which, yeah, essentially, Electroverse was not just the name of this army, but the name of their company, so to speak, which I kind of find amusing that Mike Dillon actually essentially created an entire company around recruiting alternate versions of himself, and through the use of devices, he and his Moon counterpart began recruiting other Electros from across the multiverse, and with their added manpower, they were able to build new systems to allow them to further travel into other parts of the multiverse. But a good company needs a good backbone and good IT guys, and well, in Mike's universe, his world's Otto Octavius was working for him, but to further try and map out the multiverse and learn all its ins and outs, they began grabbing any Otto Octavius they could find from any world in the multiverse, and essentially kidnapped them and pretty much enforced them to work for them. However, unfortunately for Moon Electro, the bigger the Electroverse grew, the smaller his role in it became, as he wound up joining the Electros in raids and robberies and so forth, but he wound up getting reckless. He wound up doing things that he shouldn't be doing. He was going against the plan, so to speak, and wound up getting the Electros in trouble, and he wound up causing such a ruckus that he was put on hold on, I'm going to read it because it is actually some good funny corporate jargon, so to speak. Basically, he was put on a performance improvement plan and was demoted. So much so that he is now pretty much a grunt Electro in the army and doesn't even warrant getting an interdimensional watch. And how do we know this? Because in the present day, he is the one that's guarding Spider-Gwen, and he is just ranting or raving this whole story to her, and just complaining about how, despite the fact that he's one of the guys that got this whole thing rolling, now here he is just guarding an alternate version of a guy who used to kick the shit out of him. Okay, not an alternate version of that guy specifically, but a proxy, so to speak. But my point is this, Moon Electro thinks that he's just gotten the shaft in this whole company. And while Gwen just kind of, Gwen is kind of going with him on. Basically, she hears his story and essentially just starts kind of goading him on, because since Moon Electro has been so heavily demoted, he basically is just angry and cranky at his corporate counterpart, and, well, he wants to take him down a few pegs, because, well, again, like I said, Moon Electro is the one that got this rolling, and yet Mike is the one that's reaping all the benefits, so to speak. So why wouldn't he want to get some good old-fashioned revenge? And Gwen, well, she begins kind of taking advantage of that bit of hubris, as she starts talking to him and saying, "Look, I'm your best friend here, and you and I, we want the same thing here. We want to take down the guy who's in charge of all this, maybe for different reasons, but we do want to see his ass get kicked, and right now, I think you and I can help each other." As such, Gwen begins kind of slowly getting Moon Electro on her side, and essentially goads him into helping her, as she has a portal device, but due to the battle with the Electros, it's shorted out and doesn't work anymore. But not only can Moon Electro charge it up, but he also would know the coordinates to where Mike is currently in the multiverse, which, yeah, Moon Electro does know those things. And basically, Gwen offers a temporary partnership that they can work together, and he can bring her to his base. Then they can take him down together, and essentially both get what they want. Gwen can stop the big guy upstairs, while Moon Electro can go back to being, well, no pun intended, the man in charge, so to speak. And, well, Moon Electro, he kind of goes along. He does end up buying into what Gwen is saying, and does agree to work with her. In the meantime, though, back with the Web Warriors, Mayday did jump back to Loomworld and immediately alerted them about what happened with Gwen. And while the only people she runs into are Carnes, Paviter, and Spider-Ham, she does let them know it's an emergency, and so the rest of the Web Warriors are called in, and the whole team, sans Gwen, because, captured, ends up going back to the Egyptian universe and finds the aftermath of the battle. Sure enough, Mayday does share the whole battle. It talks about how there are at least 3 or 4 Electros, one of which who was made purely of electricity, and and even Spider-Man Noir talks about how maybe it makes sense why they would be stealing silver, as it's more conductive than copper. As such, the Spideys begin going around the area and gathering intel, so to speak, because they have no idea when the Electros will come back. But they end up getting their answer as everyone who has a spider sense suddenly has a tingle, as another group of Electros just shows up, demanding that they hand over the silver. As such, the Spideys and the Electros all get into a tussle, but like with Mayday and Gwen, the Electros just vastly overpower the Spideys, as the Electros manage to get to the silver, and using their electric powers, they create essentially a Faraday cage surrounding the silver, and with its extra conductive nature, they're able to send their electricity out to any electrical and metal device that they can find, which means that the Spideys have to just jump and hop across from everywhere they can go to make sure they don't get fried, with sadly Spider UK kind of getting singed in the back, although he does protect Anya. Thankfully, Spider-Ham has a solution to this, as he asks Paviter to web him up and chuck him at the Electros, and I guess the webs are insulated in every universe, as Pavitrum actually does this and chucks him straight into one of the Electros in the group. And because one of the chains in their electric cage was taken out, it also leaves a hole that allows the Spideys to go in. Though Billy does tell them to not focus on the Electros, to focus on the silver. And as such, once the Electros hear this, the guy that gets knocked out says they just need to make a getaway because they can't let the Spideys get the silver, and so the Electros take the silver and run away. As such, Noir ends up chewing Billy out on this call because why would they go after the silver? The Electros were clearly the threat. But for Billy, it was strategic. He knew that the Electros were targeting the silver, and he also knew that the Electros would very much overpower them. So even if the Spideys made a retreat, essentially because the Electros are also jumping across the web of life and destiny to go across universes, then there's a good chance that if the Spideys went back to Loomworld, the Electros would probably follow them and essentially just overrun the place. And basically, they don't want them getting direct access to the web or Karn because, well, again, foundation of the multiverse, do not touch. As such, with the Electros gone, Billy believes that they can now make a safe retreat to Loomworld because now they know exactly what they're going up against, Billy even asks Paviter if he can track the Electros from across the multiverse, and Paviter says that because of all the electrical energy they're outputting, they could probably very easily track them. So basically, Billy thinks that they're all good, and so he and the rest of the Web Warriors end up retreating to try and lick their wounds and form a plan of attack for when they confront the Electros again. In the meantime, back with Gwen and Moon Electro. Basically, Moon Electro has taken Gwen's offer and powered up her watch and brought her to the universe that Mike Dillon is hiding on. And it turns out, as a nice little bit of screw you to Moon Electro, he set his base up on Moon Electro's universe, which I like. I do like that. I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but Mike Dillon is another Electro. I can easily see them doing this. I can easily see him going like, "Hey, you see this? Hey, you see your world here? And you know how you're the guy that did this? Well, now it's mine, so I'm just taking it now." Which I kind of like. As such, Moon Electro begins talking with Gwen about what their plan is, and that if they run into any guards, Gwen can pretend to be his prisoner. But as he's doing this, Gwen decides to deck him in the face and knock him out because, well, all she needed from him were the coordinates to this place and him to charge up her watch. So, you know, she got what she wanted. So she just leaves it. So she just leaves him out in the hall and decides to try and figure out where Mike is in this place and then kick his butt, save the day, and stop the Electros in their tracks. You know, easy peasy, right? Only there are two problems. The first of which is that Mike knows that she's coming and lets her know this very fact over the intercoms. Pretty much as such, Gwen thinks, well, whatever. You're just the suit and tie Electro. I can take you down very easily. Which Mike ends up kind of chuckling at, because yeah, he's the suit and tie Electro. Before he tells her, do you know how I've been able to maintain control of an army of psychopaths? You think this is the first attempt at a coup that's been ever going on? As such, Gwen continues tracking Mike down, and she eventually finds the room that he's in, only to find the second rub in this little plan. So, remember that Electro who was made of pure electricity that was part of the little band of Electros that Mayday and Gwen encountered last issue? That was Mike. Because when Gwen finds him, she sees him just resting not on a seat, but just charged up and large across all of these different generators. And as he himself says, because of this, he has no butt to kick now. So that's where this issue ends. So, thoughts on this issue? I like it. It's fine. It's again like with a good story, like any good storyline, it keeps the action going. It keeps the plot going while still getting some good action. The plot doesn't really progress too far, but we do get some good exposition. Case in point, I do like how we learn how the Electroverse was started. And what I do like is how it takes what was essentially once a seemingly dark moment in the original Spider-Verse that was just there to help further showcase how this is dealing with the multiverse and so forth by showing Moreland killing Spider-Moon-Man to kind of act as a fake-out for any readers who don't know all the continuity with Spider-Man, and pretty much just turns that into a plot point for this story. While that was just a random, inconsequential moment in the original Spider-Verse, for this book, it's what kickstarted the plot. As that world's Electro saw Moreland take out that world's Spider-Man, and he overheard him talking about the thousands of worlds, they've done this 1,000 times, and basically, the instant he learned about that, he wanted to take advantage of that. And from that little action, he began jumping the multiverse until he met his corporate counterpart, and they began building an army of alternate versions of themselves, which I kind of like. And I do like how they essentially built this army up as essentially just a way to take over the multiverse, which in a way kind of makes sense, especially for Mike Dillon as we know him right now, because like I said, he's the corporate Electro. He got his superpowers and immediately cashed in on them. Where he didn't decide to go full supervillain, rob banks, fight superheroes or whatever. He decided to aim for the top, and the top is where he's been ever since. So to confront him with the fact that there are probably infinite universes out there, infinite grounds to conquer, it makes sense why he would think, I can take advantage of this when he's confronted with knowledge about that. And again, it kind of makes sense why he would start building up his army using alternate versions of themselves, because in a conceited sort of way, if you're trying to do a corporate expansion on the multiverse, who better to trust with a job than yourself? Of course, there's still the matter of that most versions of himself across the multiverse are egomaniacal scumbags who would stab each other in the back rather than help each other out, but we'll address how he was able to cover that next issue. And spoilers, yeah, it does have to do with why he's suddenly now a giant big electric thing now instead of a man with just electric powers. So that's a thing we'll have to confront next issue. But again, I do like how they build it up and showcase that. And I will admit, Moon Electro isn't. I do admit, I do kind of like how the precursor to the Electroverse, in this case, Moon Electro meeting his corporate self, is kind of treated as somewhat of a joke. Like, he's the guy that got this rolling. He's the guy that gave Mike Dillon the impetus to try and jumpstart this big expansion out into the multiverse. And yet, he also now is just kind of a jerk. And yet now he's just been demoted and is now one of the lowest ranking Electros in the army. It's a nice little bit of kind of dark humor, because spoilers, Moon Electro gets abused throughout this storyline. It's kind of sad, but also kind of darkly funny. I say darkly funny because, well, he's still Electro. This is a supervillain who does a lot of what he does for shits and giggles. He does not have the same tragic backstory that the Electro from Spider-Man, the new animated series. This is an asshat who had a rough life growing up, got electric powers when he was trying to fix a telephone pole, and then said, "Well, screw this! I'm gonna go do crime now." So yeah, he's still an asshole, I suppose. But if I have to I guess if there's really anything that comes out of the story right now, it's just kind of building the plot forward. When it comes down to it, really all this issue does is just kind of help kind of set all the pieces in motion and get everything rolling. Case in point, the Web Warriors are now aware of the Electroverse and how the Electros are now jumping across the multiverse, just doing God knows what. And as a result, the Spideys now get a chance to try and plan around it and try and figure out what their end goal is, which, yeah, I guess is again complete takeover of the multiverse, because, well, they're all supervillains, so to speak. But now that they're aware of them, they can now plan out an attack and try and figure out a way to take them down, while likewise also trying to figure out how to save Gwen, since she's now behind enemy lines and all by herself. So, kind of a big thing. And of course, there's still the stuff with Gwen and how she discovers what happened with Mike. Because, yeah, like I said, there is an answer to why he's now all big and electric-y, but we won't be learning that till next issue, so yeah, I think it's a good way to end the story. I think it's a good way to end the issue. Add on having some legitimately nice action when we have the Spideys go up against the Electros, and them trying to think of creative ways to take them down, especially with Spider-Ham having the idea of having him getting thrown into one of the Electros, which actually leads to a kind of funny scene where he sees that one of the Electros is an anthropomorphic talking horse, and both he and the Electro horse are like, "Holy shit, what the hell?" when they see each other. Is actually kind of amusing. But on the whole, good issue. Continues the story well. Gives some nice backstory for how the Electroverse was formed. Has some nice good character stuff with Moon Electro. Has nice action. Nice little bit. Keeps a lot. Has the Web Warriors learn of the Electroverse's existence and try and figure out how to plan around it. And it's a nice little cliffhanger when Gwen comes face to face with Mike Dillon. So, on the whole, yeah, good issue. So, yeah, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I'll hopefully see you Saturday as we take a look at issue 3. So till then, I hope you have a good afternoon. Stay safe, and I'll see you on Saturday. Take care.